Hi, I'm Steve Podmore. Well, some of you are probably wondering where I've been. Some obviously wondering who I am, and a few probably are thinking I don't care. Well, for those who do care and those who want to know, I'll just give you a bit of an update on what's been happening in my life. Um, well, I've been working on a vision for what we call Transform Global for a number of years. It's a concept of creating an alternative investment bank to address the sustainable development goals with a number of components that, when you bring them together, could dramatically speed up and scale up how those important issues around the world are addressed. Anyway, a little over 2 years ago, I really had to take time out. My brother was quite unwell, and later in the year, in June 22, he passed away, age 50. He'd been diagnosed over 20 years ago with a serious heart complaint. And over the last few years, he'd been living with my mother, and he'd been increasingly unwell, as I said. So when he passed, sadly, it meant, well, in the run-up, I frequently needed to come up when he was in hospital and when he was not able to support my mum. But then when he passed, I had to really look after her a lot more. She would come to London. I would come up here to the Staffordshire-Cheshire border, and indeed sometimes Mum would come to London to stay with Margot and myself. But on the 13th of May last year, 2023, as I record this, it's September. It's the 9th of September. It's a significant time, which I'll explain in a little while. But I got the phone call that no one wants to receive. It was the day of the Eurovision Song Contest and also the train strike. And Mum's great friend Althea and a neighbour, Rachel, had found her basically unresponsive, called the ambulance, and the paramedics came, and they suspected a stroke. She was rushed into hospital. I, in the meantime, got an Uber to the train station, and then almost the last train out of London, managed to get to the Royal Stoke University Hospital at about 8 o'clock in the evening, and spoke to a doctor on the way, and I was told what Mum had was for sure life-threatening. Anyway, I got there, and she's still alive, but it was very touch and go for the first few days. She had chest infections. The stroke clearly had very seriously affected her, and to be honest, prior to this, I wasn't fully aware of the consequence of stroke. I knew a little bit, but like many people, a little bit doesn't really go very far when something is so catastrophic in terms of its effects, which I'll cover. Anyway, Mum was in the Royal Stoke University Hospital in Ward 127, which turns out is one of the leading stroke units in the country. It was set up by two pioneers, Dr. or Professor Roff and a consultant called Anushka, something like 25 years ago, and it was joined, they were joined by Indra Natarajan, I believe it is, and these individuals were real pioneers of stroke diagnosis and care. So, Mum was there for a month. Her speech was affected dramatically. She had something called aphasia, so really the ability to process thought around speech was dramatically affected, and just without the ability to talk, basically. Although with her eyes, with her gestures, she could still communicate, and she was clearly aware of what was going on. But yeah, she was very severely affected. Anyway, she was there for a month in Ward 127, and the day of her stroke, I literally, with the bag that I had, I moved up back to my childhood home and went to see her twice daily. In most cases, there were occasions when I just saw her once in the day, but mostly it was twice daily. And for the first few days when she was in the hospital, in that hyperacute unit, in fact, I was there pretty much 24/7 for the first 3 days, apart from quickly going home to get some more clothes and stuff. Anyway, she was then discharged into a rehab hospital. It's called the Haywood Community Hospital. And coincidentally, that was the place where my brother and myself were born a number of years ago. Anyway, Mum was at the Haywood for 3 months. Now, I will do other videos talking about the actual rehab itself and what is ideal versus what Mum and other patients received, from what I could see and from the many conversations that I had. And a month before she actually was finally discharged, she actually had a seizure, which was a bit of a shock because she was going to be discharged, and that seizure put that back. Anyway, that's something also that I will discuss in the future, because apparently a decent number of people, I think it's 20% or thereabouts, do have seizures post-stroke. Lesser in the month, several months after the stroke, but so in Mum's case, it was 3 months after her stroke, she had her first seizure. But it does happen, and I think it should be, I think it's pretty important that people are warned that is a possibility. But yeah, that's another issue. So she had a stroke, and then on the 7th of September, amazingly, she came home. We had a hospital bed given by the NHS and other equipment, as is needed in these times. A wheelchair, a commode, a ramp for bringing her into the house, which we only used a few times, and other assorted equipment as well. Anyway, she was able to come home, and well, for the first few months, we did have healthcare assistants coming in the morning and in the evening to get her up and to get her into bed. But everything else, personal care, taking her to the loo, feeding her, giving her pills, all of that I did. It was a few weeks. It wasn't straight away, but a few weeks in, and she was able to exit the house. Initially, she'd been reluctant to do that, but after time she did, and we were able to get her into the car, and that meant I could take her to the doctors and take her to coffee shops, and also the M&S where she'd enjoy some lunch. Initially, when she was discharged, she was still on thickened drinks and pureed, or what would be called a special meal. So they're done on different levels. So I think level 4 is pureed, level 5 is called minced and moist, level 6 is more resembling a normal meal, but still bigger chunks. And then I think level 7 is regular food. So towards the end of the year, Mum was really eating pretty normal, apart from she couldn't eat big mouthfuls or anything that was very fibrous. She would do what's called pocket, where putting it into the side of the mouth and not noticing it was there. The thing about stroke is you tend to lose awareness for the side that the stroke is on. So in Mum's case, it was in fact a right-sided stroke. You're probably looking at the left side on the camera, but So that meant the left side affects, the left side, left side affects the right side. So her right side of her mouth, she would not really be aware of food that might be there. She wouldn't be aware and able to use her right hand and right arm, although as things progressed, she was a little more able to use her right arm. And initially, she was completely paralyzed, really. But after about 10 days, she did get use of her right leg. And that was fortunate. It meant that she could walk, and she needed assistance, but because she was quite unsteady, it's hard to know exactly why, whether that was because of her muscle strength or that was because of the residual problems in her brain. But still, she was able to walk with that assistance, and that made all the difference in terms of her having what could be called quality of life. So she came home, and after 4 months, that's a long time, and that time in hospital, even though she could walk a little bit relative to what would be considered healthy, or a decent amount of mobility, she was only walking a small amount in hospital. So she came home, and I had to build that strength up with her. But initially, it was a bit difficult as well. She had because she had a seizure after 3 months in hospital, she was then given anti-seizure medication. Levetiracetam is called, or Keppra is the common name for it. And that amount of the drug that she was given, 5 milliliters in the morning, I think micrograms, I think it is, or 500 micrograms in 5 milliliters, is a big dose for a very small person. And so morning and evening. And therefore, for the first few days and the last month she was in hospital, she was really not able to walk very much, and she was tired, especially tired. Now, strokes give fatigue anyway, but this was an excessive level of tiredness. So Mum basically had just too much of this drug. It knocked her out, and that made caring for her so much more difficult. Taking her to the toilet or getting her into bed, she could hardly hold her own weight on her legs, and therefore it was a lot more dangerous as well. So after a few days of this, I called the doctor, who got in touch with the stroke team, and they agreed to halve this medication. And by halving this medication, it changed everything. It gave her life again. It meant she could walk. She was alert. Of course, she would still nap a couple of times in the day, as well as sleeping through the night. But really amazing was the fact that she could walk and was alert again. Anyway, so in the time she was home, there were, in the first 3 or 4 months, she did have probably about 3 chest infections that were pretty horrible to experience, because my mother had got bronchiectasis from a young age, and that bronchiectasis had meant she would often be coughing up mucus when she was ever had a chest infection. But when she had the stroke, her ability to do something like that, it was really unclear whether or not she would retain it, whether she would be able to have the mental capacity and the awareness to be able to do that. Remarkably, she did. And September, October, November, December, those chest infections, luckily we could medicate with antibiotics, speaking closely with the doctor, and she was also able to cough those infections up. And sometimes she would just look at it, not knowing what to do with it. And other times, I know this is graphic, but I had to go in there and actually pull it out of her mouth, and of course dispose of it. But other times this must have happened in the night, and she must have been able to wipe it on the bedclothes, which got washed that following morning. But I couldn't believe that she managed to survive with these chest infections. Anyway, so from early this year, she was amazing. She was really not unwell, I don't think once. We went in February, I think I mentioned, to London for a couple of weeks. And even though initially we'd had carers morning and evening, and I had done everything else, very rarely were the carers there when she needed the loo, or it was really down to me for pretty much everything. And she was very comfortable with me doing that personal care, and I've got to be honest, there were times I found it a little difficult, but mostly I was fine looking after someone I love very dearly. So then we went to London for a couple of weeks. We were able to see relatives, and we were able to go to Windsor Castle and have various trips out. We went into a restaurant. She walked into, Pizza Express. She walked into the Pizza Express in Blackheath. I was able to park very closely by. We went in her little car, and all the way to London, drove around. But yes, went into Pizza Express, and she had pasta and managed to feed herself and did incredibly well. Was obviously quite excited to see so many people coming and going, and the staff were lovely with her. So in that time, I looked after her completely, getting her ready in the morning, getting her out of bed and getting her ready, and put her in bed at night. And actually there we didn't have a hospital bed. It was Margot and my double bed, and we slept on the sofas in the lounge. So we were able to push Mum into the centre of the double bed, and she was comfortable in that environment. So what I realised was I could look after her myself. The council were basically saying that they wanted to charge quite a large amount each month, which I found frankly quite unreasonable. So rather than have council provided care where the contribution it was significant, I decided to look after myself in my entirety, or in the entirety. So that's what I did. And now, some of that time, we had a house guest, a former neighbour, who made life a little easier because he was amazing around the house and really great with Mum, Nigel. So it wasn't only me, but anything personal or delicate in nature was my purview. But Mum was happy. She wasn't distressed, and we were able to go and visit friends, as I said, or the coffee shop, or we'd watch the sport, or Netflix, things that she'd like, and she would clearly respond to some things and not others. So even though at no point did she regain speech, she did try. She talked a lot, but just gibberish really came out. Anyway, so in July the 7th, she had a second stroke. It was a Sunday evening, and the night before, I had heard when she walked into the dining room, which at that point was her bedroom. It's now my office, this room that I'm recording this video in now, or my studio. So I could hear a little crackle in her voice and realized I needed to go to the doctors on Monday, or take her to the doctors. Anyway, we didn't have the chance. So Sunday evening, she started coughing, and that started really her struggling for breath. And then clearly something else was happening. She was sick, and in an unusual way, and clearly she was having some sort of episode. So we called the ambulance. They came very quickly, maybe 10, 15 minutes. So not that quickly, but pretty quickly. And it was a pretty horrible ambulance journey. I went with her. Anyway, long story short, she had a chest infection, but and initially it wasn't thought it was a second stroke, but as the chest infection died down, her symptoms didn't, and very clearly she'd had a second stroke-like episode, although it's still difficult to tell exactly what it was because the previous scan and the latest scan kind of overlapped. Anyway, after about a week to 10 days, she was really aware that she wasn't going to be standing. They tried her multiple times. They tried to move her. They tried to get her to sit, to stand. It's a sit and stand test that is key to being able to what's called mobilize, move between the bed and the chair, and hopefully at some point walk. But she wasn't able to support herself, and therefore she had to be hoisted between a bed and a special supportive chair that they have in the stroke ward. Incidentally, she was back in the same ward she was in originally. That was Ward 127 at the Royal Stoke University Hospital. I will talk separately about stroke and the amazing people behind and involved in Ward 127, and also the people at the Hayward and also the community stroke teams. All of this experience has given me a great interest in stroke and what a massive issue it is in the world, what a massive issue it is in the UK. About 100,000 people a year have a stroke. The mortality rate used to be about a third here in the UK, as it was and is around the world. Now it's down to about 10%. But that gives a bigger problem, and that is many of those people who would previously have passed away now get to return home. But a great number of them don't get to return home or get to return either from home or to home or into care, because an awful lot are not as they were previously. They are severely disabled, and although the majority are elderly, that has a big effect. But also a large number are of working age, somewhere in the 12 to 15% range of all stroke survivors are within the working age, under 65. And for them, the issues that they encounter are very significant, including, the fact that they might need to go back to work, support their families, and the issues that they encounter are just many and significant. So, as some of you might know, I have started a little blog. It's called Life in a Stroke, but actually what I'm doing behind the scenes is turning that into a book about mine and Mum's experience, but also the experiences of many people that I've encountered, both the survivors and their families, but also those who are involved on a professional level with stroke on every level. And what is missing is in the United Kingdom, conversations about how stroke is dealt with more effectively throughout the NHS, but also how families and stroke survivors can better cope in the absence of the level of support that would be ideal given unlimited funds. The goal is also to talk about this on a global basis, and India, for example, I think it's the number one cause of disability. So there are so many issues related to stroke, and so many people whose life is in a stroke. Literally, it's wrapped up in a stroke. It's either ended or it's changed, and that is not just those stroke survivors, but many people who are directly affected or indirectly affected as a result. So going back to the situation with Mum, so the 7th of July, she had a second stroke this year. This is 2024. About 10 days in, she realized she wasn't going home, certainly not without the need to be hoisted from a bed to a chair and cared for in that way. And my mum really didn't want that. So as sad as it is, it was her real clear decision. I'd been able to go in and feed her at meal times and lunch and dinner. I was not normally there for breakfast, but because she did take quite a long time to eat, the nurses were very kind and they allowed me to go and to help. So, but after a while, it was clear she didn't want to eat. And in a way, I was tricking her by holding her arm or essentially getting the spoon to her mouth quite quickly. And she would eat initially with those, with a bit of subterfuge, but she was giving me a look that was clear that she didn't want anything. And then the minute she decided was really obvious. It was about the Wednesday of the second week. Bearing in mind she'd had the stroke on the Sunday evening. So, yeah, about 10 days in. She just held her teeth clenched. She looked at me and I tried to give her some yogurt or something. And she looked at me like I was trying to feed her a wasp to eat. She really didn't want it. And the same with drink. And the same then with medical attention. They came to try and give her an ECG and she ripped the cables off. So I had to go to London quickly. My girlfriend had been called into hospital or rushed into hospital because it's a long story, she'd had foot reconstruction surgery earlier in the year. She'd been taking pain medication and she had not been taking the stomach lining capsules, lansoprazole, I think it's called. And that meant she'd got internal bleeding. So I went down when I was sure she was okay. A couple of days later, I came back. So I got back early on the Saturday morning. And when I realized she was still not eating, and the nurses, I mean, of course, I'd spoken many times while I was away, but when I came back, the nurses thought perhaps she wasn't eating because I was not there giving her her food. But it wasn't the case. She really had decided. So I spoke to the consultants and asked them not to give her the drip or a drip anymore. And they introduced a palliative care team, and they agreed that really she was on an end-of-life pathway then, as they call it. It's a strange name. And she was sedated. She was given midazolam, the anti-seizure medication to prevent her seizures and to make sure she was relaxed and not in any real pain. And as things progressed, they also gave her morphine, although there were occasions, particularly towards the end, when she did regain alertness. And that was pretty distressing. But that aside, she had phenomenal care in the entire 4 weeks, really, that she was there. Incredible. The people really gave her dignity, the healthcare assistants and the nurses. They really, I just cannot speak highly enough, as well as for all the other staff, those who are providing the occasionally a sandwich or drinks for myself. They're very, very kind. And cleaning the ward and just making sure, for Mum and for all the other patients, that it was the right environment. So thank you to everyone, if on the off chance you're watching this. But of course, my thanks are also to the doctors and the consultants and the pharmacists and to the palliative care team. Anyway, her last day was peaceful. It was the Saturday, and she passed in the late afternoon, just after 4 o'clock. So it had been a difficult, I'm guessing, 15 months from a stroke to her passing. And she was in the same ward twice, a month at the beginning and a month at the end. And she was in the Hayward for 3 months. And she was at home for 10 months or thereabouts. And the number of conversations I was able to have in that time with not just other staff, other patients and their families, and I will mention quite a few of them in the weeks and months to come. But the staff and the healthcare professionals, I'll just mention one right now. This was in the Royal Stoke, and it was, I guess, I'm going to say a couple of weeks after, about halfway into Mum's second visit to the Royal Stoke University Hospital. And it was somebody who had remembered Mum and a little bit myself from the first time she was there. I did something to try and keep her spirits up while she was there. Mum had really loved clothes through her life. Never expensive. She'd gone to charity shops and I think they called thrift stores in America, but she had frequently purchased amazing clothes, but for not a lot of money. And she'd always been color coordinated, and she got a huge wardrobe. Over the last few weeks, myself and Margot have got rid of all her clothes, most of them. We've kept a few items, but had gone to the charity shops. And the number of bags of clothes my mum had, and shoes and handbags, unbelievable. Anyway, so what I did is from the very first day, so when she was out of the hyperacute, so she was there for 3 days, that's like the very high intensive intensity care. When she was then moved into a bay with 3 other stroke survivors, stroke patients, on the rail up from the bed, up to the left, I would bring a different outfit. I also brought some photographs which had blown up of her garden and of myself and my brother and me and my father. I would bring the clothes every day, a different outfit, sometimes an evening gown, a dress, trouser suits, all manner of things. And it was quite a while before I needed to rotate. And I'm not sure she noticed. But she would look up and she would see these clothes, but also so would the staff. And it would give them something to talk to and talk to her about. And for me, it was a bit of fun, but it was also trying to give her something to cheer her up. Anyway, apparently it's not as common as you would think. I thought it was so obvious, but so this lady, I won't mention her name, but she came up to me, and I had seen her. So this is on the second time I was in, and I'd seen her in the corridor and in the lift, and I'd spoken to her at the front of the hospital, and I'd noticed the jacket she had Keele University, which is the affiliated teaching hospital, a few miles away from the main hospital. Sorry, affiliated university, a few miles away from the hospital, which is a teaching hospital. And I said, "What are you studying?" And it turns out she, a mature age, had gone back to do her advanced nursing qualification, so she could be a fully fledged nurse. And I thought that was amazing. It was great, but we didn't really talk very, very long. And then one day she came up to me and said, "Steve, I remember you from last time. I remember the clothes. I remember your mum. But I didn't feel comfortable coming and talking to you this time. But I've been watching, and I really felt I wanted to come and talk to you now." And I was a bit confused, and I really didn't understand quite why. And longest short of it was, she came from a different country. She'd come over here to work as a nurse, or to train and then work as a nurse. And her father had passed away back at home. Mum had insisted she didn't go back, but for the funeral, so she wouldn't remember her father, who had passed away from a stroke in those final days. And then also her mum had passed away from a stroke. And what she said just blew me away. And it was which I knew it was a privilege to be able to look after Mum and to be there with her all the time when she was in hospital, because I'd literally put all my life on hold. And Margot, my girlfriend, and I have gone through a lot of financial hardship as a result. It's been really difficult on so many levels. But I just felt I had to do it. And no matter what. And I just couldn't see my mum in care. I didn't want that for her. I didn't want it for me or for Margot to have to know she was in an environment that she just wouldn't have wanted to be in. In fact, just digressing a little, there was a moment where, when Margot had her foot reconstruction surgery, I had to, and also I was not well. I had a heart problem, which I still have, but it's under control. It's called AF. And I was diagnosed with it only in March this year, but I was exhausted. So at the same time as realizing I needed serious treatment myself, I had to go to look after Margot, who was having foot reconstruction surgery on the 4th of April. And there's no way I could take Mum down, being as I was personally, and, knowing Margot would need a lot of support. So I was forced to find some respite care. And thankfully, the Cheshire East Council found a place and contributed to the cost. Although some money was due for Mum to go in there for 10 days. But she hated it. It was clean. The people were nice. But while she was there, she had a first fall, and she also had a seizure, first seizure from being released or being discharged from hospital. So I realized that all the time, the last thing I wanted was for my mum to be in care. And that 9-10 days, whatever it was, just confirmed how much I didn't want that as an outcome for her. So going back to the lady in the hospital who approached me, so she recognized I'd had a privilege of being there for my mum. I probably did everybody's head in because I was talking to all of the staff, to different patients and their families who could talk. And really just being myself. But I really felt so strongly for this lady who had lost both parents to strokes and couldn't be there for her. So even though watching a loved one waste away, as I did that last month, and it was excruciating, really excruciating. Many people have gone through this, so it's not new. But also spending that 15 months, whatever it was, with her and loving her, holding her, looking after her in every way, laughing with her, but crying with her sometimes too. That's a privilege that not that many people get to have. And I'm incredibly grateful. And so this was a realization that be multiple realizations actually, but it was yet another realization that stroke was something that is important, but also when you realize that the conversations are not being had to demystify what might happen, what happens for families, what happens for loved ones, what happens for the stroke survivors, what options do they have. There's so many things where as a loved one, a carer, you just are left in the dark. It's kind of like you're really you're fighting for information. So anyway, I decided to launch the blog Life in a Stroke, which I'm writing into a book. But that concept, I've realized, is actually much bigger. It fits within a broader concept of the NHS and what we can do to improve the NHS in the United Kingdom, which I'll talk about in a live stream and Zoom call that I'm going to do over the next week, 10 days. Please look out for the invite. And where I'll announce what this concept is and how it can fit into the broader platform for the bank, and how it can also enable the bank to come to fruition. So I guess it's implied that while I've been spending time with my mum and having this great privilege, as difficult as it has been, I've been thinking about how the system needs improvement. And that system, which doesn't exist in much of the world, needs to be created. And how we need to provide a way of giving gold standard stroke care for people all over the world. That's what we need. So for those of you who are wondering, that's where I've been. I've been mourning the loss of my brother. I've been living life in a stroke with my mother since May of last year, and been sharing that experience with many, many people Um, and also I got asked to coordinate a group for what's called Different Strokes, a charity, a national charity, but a local chapter of a national charity that would meet once a month for young stroke survivors. So, although the last few months, I've not been able to engage as I had previously since about October, for maybe 8-10 months. I have gone to meetings, help facilitate those meetings, and enable people to talk and share their experiences who are young stroke survivors. And that has been both illuminating, it's been fulfilling, but it's also showed me the range of issues that people face. And again, underwriting the need to do something to shed light and understanding in this very, very important space. My mum was a real special person. She was a character. She was one of 6 children. She was very close to her sisters and her remaining brother, her first eldest brother had passed away before she was born. Sadly, my father died in 1999, so my mother lost a partner and a friend in life. But she still lived a full life. She traveled. She enjoyed her garden, and she enjoyed her clothes and her friends, and she was a curious person, someone who enjoyed life. And I will and already miss her greatly, and I will continue to. But going forward, I think I need to channel that energy and help rebuild my life and my girlfriend's life by doing something important. And whether that's the full vision I had for the investment bank or even a portion of it, I'm committed to do something that can help people and help them in a way that works for our economies. Many of you know that I have some economic theories that I believe could change significantly how healthy economies could emerge or could enable them to emerge, not just in the UK, but around the world. And it's all to do with getting capital to where it needs to get to have the greatest effect, and trying to use various methods to create a competitive environment. I still believe in capitalism, but capitalism as it should be, not as it's become. And this is part of what I'll be talking about, and including in the material that I'm writing. So, Life in a Stroke, look out for that and the continued posts on the blog. This is quite an all-encompassing post to update people, so apologies for the time. As Mark Twain once said, I was going to write you a short note, but I didn't have the time. Well, in the future, hopefully these posts will be a little bit more concise. But thanks for watching. Hopefully you got to the end. And if you did, and you are interested in what I'm doing, or have any thoughts, feel free to get in touch. All right. Thanks so much.